participate in the first of 3 equity workshops facilitated by Ms. Mary Fertakis. I'm excited to have her back to help us navigate this courageous conversation as we work, but the work we're doing together will serve as critical foundation for our next strategic plan. I have said this before, but I want to reiterate, we know the sense of urgency to put a meaningful strategic plan in place is heightened because of COVID. We have an obligation to the students and families of Palm Beach County to make strategic investments aimed at repaying the educational debt that is owed to them. Before I turn it over to Mary, I want to share something that she emphasized with me in our past 2 conversations. The data we look at today and moving forward should be used as a flashlight to help us shine a light on the root cause of inequities in our school system. If we start using the data like a hammer, we jeopardize our ability to engage in honest discussions about what we must do better as a collective organization, from the boardroom all the way down to the classroom level. The board talked about the importance of culture last week, and I hope we keep that conversation fresh in our minds as we participate in the first equity workshop today. And with that, I will now turn it over to Ms. Fertakis.
Mr. Superintendent, let me get the roll call.
Okay.
Would the clerk take the roll, please?
District 1, Barbara McQuinn.
Here.
District 2, Alexandria Ayala.
Here.
District 3, Karen Brill.
Here.
District 4, Erica Whitfield.
Here.
District 5, Frank Barbieri.
Here.
District 6, Marcia Andrews.
Here.
District 7, Deborah Robinson.
We have quorum with all 7 board members. Viewers and listeners can access the meeting today by either watching on Comcast channels 234 and 235, UVerse channel 99, or by using the YouTube link on our webpage at palmbeachschools.org. We also offer a listening-only option, which the public can access by calling 561-357-5900 or toll-free at 1-866-930-7015. The meeting ID is 1-561-880-124. #. This meeting is being transcribed by a closed captioner, so remember to speak at a reasonable pace. And Mr. Superintendent, if you will allow us to stand, and we'll have the Pledge of Allegiance led by Mrs. McQuinn.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Good afternoon, Ms. Fertakis. It's all yours.
Okay, thank you so much, Mr. Barbieri. And as we discussed, since I am limited technology-wise in being able to see everyone on the board, Mr. Barbieri is going to be assisting me by calling on board members as we go into our discussion time. And so I just want to say thank you up front for assisting me with that, that bit of the logistics. So we're going to dive in. I am not able to see if the PowerPoint presentation is up yet. So if someone could confirm for me.
Yes, it's up.
The board can see it. It's up. Okay, great. Okay, so we're going to go to the, so I want to welcome the board, and I want to thank each of you for the time you spent with me with your one-on-one conversations that have resulted in the graph that you each have at your places. And we're going to be doing just a couple of things going into this workshop, but the bulk of the time is going to be spent with discussion. And notes will be taken for you to be able to refer back to. This is in this particular workshop, this is your opportunity to be taking a lot of information that you've been provided, data related, doing this root cause analysis, other work that we did together to provide a foundation for this. And this is really your time to be able to talk through some very real issues that you've all identified, and to be having an authentic, and we call it brave, we don't call it safe conversations, because if you're trying to have a safe conversation, it means that we're not being real about some significant issues that are going to be foundational for your work going forward in trying to do the system change that you've indicated is a priority for you. So let's go to the first slide, where we have just a basic outline of the agenda for today. And we're going to do a check-in like we've done before, where I'm going to ask each of you to, with Mr. Barbieri's assistance, to go around the room and share a word or a phrase of how you're showing up today. And so we'll start with that.
Mrs. McQuinn?
Hoping, but not hopeful.
Ms. Ayala?
Ready to dig in and understand how we can start addressing the concerns we've all outlined.
Ms. Brill?
Stressed, but not because of this.
I'm hoping we can finally get this done. As Dr. Robinson said, we've been working on this for 20-some years, so it's about time we finished it. Dr. Fenoy?
Driven.
I'm actually just in a really good mood, so I'm happy to be here.
Ms. Whitfield? Ms. Andrews?
Concerned and hopeful.
Dr. Robinson?
Expectant.
Thank you. You got us all.
Okay, thank you. Again, because we're doing equity work, it's important to do a land acknowledgement to ground us in the spaces that we're in. So I want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are representing 3 Indigenous people groups on this call today. The Seminole, which is a federally recognized tribe, the Tequesta, who are no longer have a presence on the lands that many of you are on, and the Duwamish, which is where I'm speaking to you from today, which is a federally unrecognized tribe. I would like to acknowledge the historic role that our Native American tribes have played in stewarding the lands and the waterways that we have benefited from for hundreds of years, and that we continue to enjoy today, and want to recognize that our existing education system has not served this people group well, and needs a lot of work. So let's go on to the next slide, where I want to do our framing with the norms that we have used for our past discussions, and just as a reminder for all of us as we have our time together today. And these norms are to speak your truth, and that means that all perspectives are valid and all perspectives are partial. I can speak of my lived experience as a middle-class white woman. It is one perspective, and once I've had my say, I need to sit back and listen to the many other perspectives that are represented as an opportunity to learn. Stay engaged. We are going to be spending approximately 4 hours together, and at some point in time, about halfway, we will be taking a break, and we will, when we get to a natural break point, we will do so probably about halfway through. But again, this is going to be hopefully a real and brave conversation, and sometimes that can make it challenging to stay engaged. And so I would encourage us to be just thinking and cognizant of that. Expect to experience discomfort. Again, this is all part of having brave conversations, and while we can tend to want to pivot away from discomfort, this is actually a very powerful place to be in, because we're in a learning space. When we are hearing things that are challenging us, thought processes we may have had, beliefs that we've carried forward, that can bring discomfort. It also means that we're being reflective, and we're thinking about what's being said, and this is a positive thing. I'll also reiterate that if everyone in the room doesn't experience some level of discomfort during our time together, then I will have failed as a facilitator, because it will have meant that I've not been able to share anything with you that is new and is causing you to do some deep reflection. We need to be aware of our intent and own our impact. Many times we can say that I didn't intend for this to come across this way, but the issue isn't what our intent is. The issue is what was the impact of our words on those around us. And if they have caused harm, then we need to be willing to just acknowledge that and be thankful that someone has brought it to our attention, because when we know better, we can do better. We need to also accept and expect non-closure. We do have an agenda for today, and I have objectives for you. That in the spirit of equity work, we get as far as we get. And we have to be okay with that because this isn't a one-off, it's a continuation, and we pick up wherever we left off the next time we get together, which is at this point scheduled for March 31. And then would all encourage all of us to maintain a learner's stance and remain open to new thinking. So I'd like to do a little check-in with you. If you could all either give me a thumbs up, sideways, or down on accepting the norms for this conversation, that would be great. Okay, wonderful. Thank you. So let's move on to the next slide. And we just wanted to remind you where we are. You're going to be seeing a timeline at every one of our meetings. And there's multiple reasons for that. It's to provide accountability for the process, to let you know where we are, because you've got a lot of moving pieces in this work, where you've got both your equity work going on and your strategic planning work going on. So this is going to be a visual for us to track where we are, and if there are adjustments that need to be made, it's going to be done intentionally and with consensus of your leadership team. And so we can see where we are today in that process. All right, so let's go on to the next slide and dive into what the meat of this conversation is going to be today. You have all participated in a one-on-one session that where you responded to the prompt, why do inequities exist in Palm Beach County schools? The purpose of this exercise is to provide an opportunity to get below the surface of responses to questions and issues and start getting to the heart of what's happening, which are the systemic issues that cause inequities. I want to say thank you to each of you at this point. You all came prepared to the meetings, and we had very thoughtful conversations. Also want to acknowledge this is a different way of doing this particular exercise. Given Florida's open public meeting laws, it necessitated having a one-on-one conversation with your leadership team members. And I think there was some value in this because everyone was given the same amount of time to be able to share their thoughts and their thought process around inequities. And so I want to thank you for this, because what you have in front of you now is a very rich document to provide the foundation for some hopefully very good conversations. What I want to, since you received this morning, I wanted to give you a few minutes to just have some reflection time to look through what everyone has read. We put it in a format that hopefully is easy for you to track for each level as we went down, and so that you can see the thought process of your colleagues. So I'm going to set a timer for about 10 minutes so that you can just have some quiet time to read through it. If there's notes you want to take, anything you want to highlight in preparation for our conversation, I'm going to start that timer now. You have 2 minutes remaining. Okay, so I know it's not a lot of time, but hopefully this gave you a chance to be able to just think through some of the thoughts that your colleagues have expressed. We're going to now dive into the conversation part, and because we're going to be working through and talking about both the information on the root cause analysis graph, as well as the data that you were presented at your March 3rd workshop, I just wanted to note that Mr. Mark Howard is also present today to be able to answer specific questions that you may have about the data pieces that you want to highlight. So at this point, I want to open it up to the board to start having their any discussion you would like to have. And this is free form. You can start wherever you would like. There are some things that I have also noted in it. And so if there are some things that are not being raised or highlighted during the discussion time, I may ask a prompting question just to ensure that other things that were raised are going to be able to get some airtime if you would like to do so. And with that being said, I would again rely on Mr. Barbieri's assistance to be able to call on different members of the board to speak as they would like to. And notes will be taken so that, again, you will have a record to be able to refer back to, because when we come back together on March 31st and spend a couple of minutes framing for the next time, just to let you know, what we're doing today is rolling into your next time together, because that's when we're going to be looking at creating a draft equity statement / description that will be foundational for the work you're doing with your strategic planning, any policy work, revisions, and your mission and vision. So, oops.
Thank you, Ms. Fertakis. Any board member would like to go first? Mrs. Whitfield.
I just felt like there's a good theme throughout this where everyone has similar answers. We seem to all understand the issues, really just that this is a system that's been going on for a long time, and the way that power seems to be divvied up in the district is not equitable, and so that's one of the biggest problems. The biggest concern that I had that I expressed to you, Ms. Fertakis, during our conversation was I'm not really sure how to change it. So I'm hopeful that during our conversation today we can talk a little bit more about, what is it that as a district would help us to be able to really change it? Because it looks like everyone sort of agreed on the same issues. Thank you.
Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you, and I do agree that the theme is rolling in here as to how this district has been dealing with our students, our parents, our schools, and our communities. And it's really clear from reading the comments from all board members and administration that those students who come from backgrounds of privilege or come from backgrounds where their parents have been able to secure an education at another level, a high level, or living in neighborhoods where life is good, and you look at the data, it shows that, most of those students are doing well. And it's because of our big bureaucracy. We know that. We know where the children are. And those that have had less, when you think about their lives, where they live, their parents, their educational backgrounds of their parents, the facilities, the curriculum, the teachers, the administrators, all of the pieces of the puzzle of where the children that don't have much are part of our school district. They have received less, and the data shows that they're struggling. They're struggling to make it. It also, looking at the comments here, it's obvious that when we look at our schools, as well as our staffs, as well as our parents and our students, it is white here in Palm Beach County. And it looks like it rules, because when you look at the children, based on what we're looking at here and hearing the comments from you all, the ones that are of color, those who have economic disadvantages here in Palm Beach County, they've been suffering for years, and they're still suffering.
Vice Chairwoman Brew?
Thank you. So I started writing down some of the common themes. So yes, a lot of us are on the same path, and I think it comes down to the culture. We talked about this at our last meeting, that that we have a culture in this district, and it's going to take a lot to change it. I think that we see a theme in here also of it's easier to go with the flow, the path of least resistance. So it's going to take us to really work together with administration to make everyone uncomfortable as we move forward. But I think that it's not only, for me, not only white versus people of color, but it's people with kids with disabilities, English language learners, whether they're, whatever their background is. We just have always seemed to work the hardest with those that would give us more bang for our buck, those that would give us those A-rated schools and make us look good. So, this is exciting. As I read through everyone's comments, I started to get more excited about this, so thank you.
Anyone else? Ms. Ayala?
Thank you. So I went through and counted different words on the different entries just to see what words, kind of like a word bank of which ones had the most similar use. 7 out of 9 of these used the word power, 6 out of 9 used culture, and 5 out of 9 used resources. Now, that was from a quick sweep, maybe I missed some, but imbalance of power, power dynamics, a culture, which has already been said, and the culture and the hierarchy, and I found some pieces about new ideas and board members wanting to just have job security, which I found an interesting comment, because historically there's been a very minimal change in who served on the board over periods of time. So maybe that's something that's contributing to the culture and the power dynamics. And then 5 out of 9 said resources, which is allocation and priorities. So that's really what the 3 words that if I had to pick out stuck out to me. And I think we're all these answers show a determination to get to the bottom of how to solve it, because we all know what the issues are. Now we just have to have the political will, which was also in here, to get it done.
Anyone else? I think one thing I'd like to see, Mr. Superintendent, at some point, we hear constantly, and I think we all believe that children need role models, and the best role model is somebody that looks like them in their classrooms. We hear constantly that, that it's out of balance, and it is. But I think it would be important for the board to actually know, maybe we break it down by region. I'd like to know how many new teachers were hired in each region, and how many were white, how many were Hispanic, and how many were black, and also compare that to how many applicants there were with the same breakdown, so that we can see if there really is some kind of pattern where we have, a total inequity in the number and the applicants that don't match the hiring. So, and I'm not sure we even have that information, because I know principals get resumes all the time on their desks to hire teachers, and I don't know if that's tracked by HR or not. Yeah, I think that would give us all, some definite evidence. A lot of this is trying to figure out how to fix it, but I mean, if we have, that's an area we can certainly start at. It's just trying to make sure that those inequities in the hiring practices are eliminated as quickly as we can, to start, putting Hispanic teachers in front of Hispanic kids, and, black children get black teachers. If, assuming we have them that are applying, we should certainly be trying to make that match as best we can. Mrs. Andrews?
One thing I went back to pull was the New York University study, and I was here during that time. And it really talked about recruiting and placing of teachers. And I think just last week I mentioned that we know where the teachers are. We know what we're doing in placing the teachers, many of them with the advanced degrees and the experience. When the Office of Civil Rights was here within the Palm Beach County School District because of equity issues, and we were reported, and it was clear that if we didn't get ourselves in line, that we would lose our funding. So we did this big study back in 2016, and it told us the same things that we're talking about right now here on these sheets, about the recruiting, about professional development, how we're leaving many of the communities out, where we should have partnerships with the communities of color and many of the communities that we already know through the data, ESC communities, ELL communities, where the children are coming from, that we needed to put something together to make a difference for these children to excel. So we've been hearing this for a while, and this is one of the reasons I feel concerned and worried, because some of this information, I keep reading it and we keep talking about it. And so everybody needs to go back. We paid a lot of money to do that study with New York University, and it was really clear. It told us the same kinds of things we're talking about now as to what we must do. So I just think maybe for all of you, go pull it back down again and read it, and it's definitely what we are already talking about today.
Can I interject something? Some of the things that we're going to be talking about, and this is a great example, which is hiring practices, and it's not just hiring practices, but it's also retention and looking at data related to your retention numbers. These are the kinds of things that would be considered action plans or action items under a future strategic plan. And so I think it would be helpful as we're going through, because some issues are going to be specifically highlighted as people are responding to, to the comments or wanting to elaborate on what they may have said themselves in here. And it would be a really good idea, as some of these action items are surfaced, to have them as a bit of a parking lot, for lack of a better term, of the types of things that you will want to be considering as a part of the strategic planning process, because there's always some type of a pillar related to instruction, which usually includes things related to hiring. And if you're going to be looking at this and embedding equity through your plan, then these would be the types of things that you would want to have parking lotted to be able to be a part of that conversation.
Dr. Robinson, I saw you move your microphone towards you, so you want to speak? Go ahead, Mrs. Andrews.
I'd just like to follow up, because we as a board, I know that the hiring falls under the administration, But we as a board have to take more of an active role in that. And one of the things that came out of the New York University is that the district needed to take more of a lead in the placement of teachers and staff so that your schools can really look like the students that they serve. And I know that we've had school-based decision-making, and so most of the principals kind of can do the things that they want to do based on how they see their staff. But as I said before, we were put on line with the Office of Civil Rights that if we didn't do it from the district level, that we would lose our funding. So when we start talking about administration, when we start talking about frontline staff in the schools, when I walk in a school, one of the first things I'm looking for to see if the school actually represents the students that are there. And if we don't look at that, because a lot of that work doesn't come to us as a board, it may come to us as a board by way of a number. The teachers are hired at the end of the year or during the year, especially at the beginning of the year. We don't really look at where the teachers are going. I think something has to be in the strategic plan where the board can kind of look at numbers to see what the students and teachers and staff looks like, as well as the administration, and then to kind of know that before you do your real hiring, the biggest part of your hiring for the year, when you're making a change, so that when the superintendent brings a recommendation to us, before that recommendation comes, we can have a discussion about what does it look like in that school before the recommendation comes in. And that's where the Hispanic piece, 37% Hispanic students in Palm Beach County. And when we look at the leaders within our school district, as well as the students and the communities, we're way off.
Dr. Robinson?
So I'm responding to this spreadsheet. So I really have mixed feelings. It's interesting to me that, I'm gonna put it this way. Maybe some people heard what I've been saying for decades, right? Or maybe it came from elsewhere, whatever. So there's some hopeful comments in here. But then the next thing is like, well, damn, why don't I get an amen? Right? So, yeah. So what are we going to do? So I want to go back a little bit. So, like in another lifetime, it was like at least 25 years ago, I was on the school district's compliance monitoring committee, which was the committee of citizens to monitor the school district's compliance with the Office of Civil Rights Agreement. And I was representing the NAACP. And one of the turning points for me in understanding this district, and it's reflected in some of these comments, is after one of these meetings, the gentleman who was the staff liaison to the committee was standing right outside those doors, and he lit a cigarette, and he said, "Dr. Robinson, you know why we don't educate your children? Because you don't make us." Okay? And some of what's in here, there's a couple comments in here that conjure back up in my head. But excuse me, that's the same old power crap, right? That is the same old crap to blame people who have not had access and advantage for generations and say, but you should speak up. You should show up. You should come to the board meeting. You should do this. You should do that. That's why we're not educating your children. And that is crap. We know it's crap, but that's the excuse that he hid behind. And I think that it's a convenient excuse. Okay? Or we can even say, we didn't know. Oh, bull. We have data that tells us. We don't need that mama to tell us. Right? And then the other thing I want to say on that line is, I think we had a conversation before about nice white parents, right? The podcast. And Ms. Ayala, I think, brought it up. And I think that we suggested that you listen to it. There was one part in there where they told this story in New York City schools where black parents boycotted. I don't really remember the exact issue. Okay, but they boycotted. more than 50% of the students stayed home. Did they listen to them? No. Okay? No. Okay? And so we need to admit that we don't listen to some people. And we need to stop, now is the time, right? To stop the okie doke, right? So, okay, so how many black parents you need to come to say that we ain't educating black children? How many? Like, what's the critical mass, okay, that will make us do right? No, we need to educate children like they're orphans, okay? We don't need any parents, any pastors, any community members, or any board members to point this out. We know it. So let us not hide behind that particular lie. Let's find a new lie to hide behind if we're going to hide. I hope we stop hiding. But let me just tell you, don't pull that one out for me now, because I've already triggered on that. I will respond with vigor, okay, if you pull that one out. Because I've heard that one for 25 years, right? When you don't listen to us, it don't matter. Wait, hold on. I'm going to just have a momentary flashback just for a second, and I'm going to come back in line. When the board, it wasn't the same configuration, in one meeting said, we're not going to put the Leadership Academy at the historic Roosevelt High School, and at the same meeting contemplated turning school police over to the sheriff. Same meeting, sitting in this configuration. The next board meeting, the chambers were packed full of black people who, seemed, my recollection is evenly split. Some saying, don't go to the sheriff. Others were saying you need to do the Roosevelt Leadership Academy for young men. Did we listen? No. A lie got spun in the community, not the community, in the audience, and it got spread. And everybody nodded their head, all the other board members nodded their head in agreement to that lie. And that lie was Dr. Robinson told the community bad information, told the community that the board was racist, okay? That's the lie that was told. Because we had to come up with a lie so we as a board would not listen to the room full of black people who came to express their opinion. So how many black people is it that you need to show up to say to educate black children? The answer ought to be 0, okay? We should not need 1. We know we're not educating black children. And as I have pointed out, we ain't even educating white middle-class white females to the level that I would expect, right? So I'm just saying, let's come clean, y'all. Just let me know. Let me know if we coming clean. Thank you.
Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. I just wanted to make a quick comment, 2 quick comments about the getting teachers that look like the kids. I find one small problem with that, which is I really want my kid who's white to get teachers who are black and Hispanic as well. I think it's really important that kids see leadership in all varieties of children. And so I think what we need to say overall is just is how we can recruit a better diversity of people into our teaching and administrative ranks, because I don't think we need to be just looking to make sure that black children have black teachers, because I know my kid needs black teachers. She needs to see a person in power that they have to respect, and I think that's really important across the board. The other thing I wanted to say about it is one of the things I was looking through this list was when a principal gets stuck with a complaining parent, which happens all the time in this district every single day, and the principal says no to them, then that parent generally doesn't just take that no. They will go to the area office, or they will go to a board member, or they will go to a senior staff member, and eventually they get to a point where it gets to us. And if it gets to us, we usually say, just give it to them so we can move on. And so we're not, as a board, backing up principals who are trying to, or staff members who are trying to keep equity at the forefront, because we we acquiesce too quickly is what I'm trying to say. So I think a lot of the power dynamics here are if people are trying to do the right thing, if a staff member is trying to do the right thing, we have to stand up with them to make sure that they are doing what we ask them to do, and that we're going to say, you know, we're going to back you up and continue that going forward. Because I think the equity issues that we have, a lot of it comes down to we don't want to fight because it becomes we have a bunch of people at our board meetings, and then we don't like that and we're very uncomfortable with it. Those are just two things. Thanks.
Vice Chairwoman Brill and Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you. So I have to tell you that when I moved down here, it was about 31 years ago. My biggest concern, I remember saying it to my ex-husband, coming from New York, is that my children are never going to know people that live different, that look different than them. When I moved here, if you were black, you lived on the east side of I-95. If you were white, you lived on the west side. I was also told, don't put a mezuzah on your front door because the KKK is out in Wellington. So now, fast forward to now, to today, and you see the change in populations. You have a lot of Brazilians down in West Boca. You have a very diverse community. And I think a lot of the problem, I really don't believe it's intentional. I believe that the population has shifted over the years, and it's time that we start really serving everybody, black, white, brown, yellow. I mean, there are different populations. I hear from the Haitian parents that we're not serving their students. So I think that, you know, we're here to do the right thing, to make sure that everybody gets an equitable education. So I applaud us, but I do not believe this has been intentional. I do believe that it is an opportunity now for us to work together, and it's going to take more than just the board. We have to work with the entire district on this and bring and the entire community. But I'm very optimistic. I mean, these are hard conversations, but I'm thrilled that this is not the Florida that I moved to 31 years ago.
Mrs. McQuinn, I'm sorry. You were on the list and I skipped over you twice, so it's all yours, as long as you'd like to speak.
Wow, thank you. At some other time, I want to come back to the issue of what Ms. Ayala said about determination, and as a board, having the conscious determination to not be swayed for political expediency, because sometimes I felt very alone. But what I'd like to do now is respond to Dr. Robinson's comment about we need to teach students like they're orphans. We have said for so many years, why does this student outperform another student? Well, because their parents are more involved. We can't get the parents to come. I agree. We should need zero black parents to come before us to tell us to educate our black students. And I know we're talking about educating all students, but for me, for a while, we need to focus. We cannot be all things to all people. Right now we're talking about black student equity. I thought that's where we were a couple of months ago. So I'm sticking to that for a bit. We know we need community involvement. We know we need all these things, but we need to act like we don't have any of that. We have students. What are we going to do about the resources we have, including our human resources, to educate our kids? So I wouldn't have said it quite that delicately, as Dr. Robinson says, but I do agree 100% with her.
Mrs. Andrews.
Thank you. And the reason I take you back for the history, because I was here. And I just want to say, you know, when the government put the thumb on Palm Beach County, not just for the human resources piece and getting the teachers to be equitable, to look like the students that they were actually teaching and the administrators, it was also for facilities. And we moved as a district, and we got it done. And this is when we made all those improvements in a lot of the schools during this time. So we as a board will have to step up to the plate. I mean, we're a $3+ billion agency here. We get monies from the federal government. We have to kind of look at our budget a lot more to decide how that money is going to be spent. We do want to have partnerships within our community. I know that most people work the regular school day, but you've got to get to know the community where your children are. You got to know who the children are. It's easy to listen to the data from Mark Howard. We know what that is. But we have to look at the individual child. We've got to dig deep down to the children when we start saying we want to make sure that we give them exactly what they need. And I think we look at the data and we move on and say we're doing this, but I think it's stitching. And so we've got to begin to build true partnerships with parents and let them have the power for their children to do what's needed. And yeah, they may not have to come to the school board, but because we as school board leaders, as administration, we need to be going to them and making sure that we put opportunities out there for them to use their power. The people that use their power here in Palm Beach County know how to use their power, and they have used their power to get the things necessary for the children within their scope. But when we get power for every parent, for every child, then all of this data that we're looking at right now that's so depressing because we haven't done the things we need to do for all children, it's going to be good for everybody. So we've just got to do that. And I worry because when we're saying that I want quality teachers everywhere. That's something I spent half of my life doing that, going all across the country getting the best teachers. I want to go to school and not see most of the Hispanic people in a school that's working as a custodian. This is what HEC talks about to me as a board member. Why don't we have the teachers? This is why we're continually battling for international teachers if we can't find them here. The lifespan of a teacher is from 3 to 5 years because of things like pay and staff development and the whole works. But we've got to do what we have to do. We have to grow our own. We need to get out into the community. We have people that work in a lot of different fields. We may be able to recruit them to come into teaching if we do the necessary extra work to do that. We have people right here that we can grow and develop, and we have to grow our own. So, I mean, there's so many things we can do, but we can be status quo and just take whatever we have. And when we do status quo, yes, many of those teachers are going to go where it's most convenient for them, maybe in their neighborhood, close by, or whatever. And then many of the children that's in the areas where they need so much help, they don't get those teachers. And so they end up with a substitute or an aide or some assistants, and it goes on and on and on and on. So, I mean, we got to really look at the data on all of that. Who do we have in front of our children, the curriculum, as well as the facilities. All of those pieces have to be, we've got to go back and look at it, especially when we start looking at the data and where we're losing children. And it's all going to correlate because it's going to show that we didn't stick the pen in there and work it to help those children.
Go ahead, Dr. Robinson.
So, okay, so yes, I mean, I agree. The studies actually show that all students of every race benefit from having black teachers. So but I agree with the spirit of the comments. But I think but what we're talking about, I think, is system change. And so I don't really want to talk about like more projects. What I want to talk about, what are we doing now that's causing these disparate outcomes, right? So what are we doing that's discouraging black teachers from coming here or staying here, right? I think that's the first thing we have to look at, because if we're doing something that's creating the problem, first we need to remove that before we start piling other projects on top of it. And I'm glad that, the word culture came up, because it's really clear to me that that's what the problem is, right? And culture is tied to language, right? And so let me give you a definition for me. When I say black, I'm talking about the African diaspora, right? So if I'm talking about the multi-generational Africans in America, that's what I'm gonna say, right? But when I say black, I'm talking about the entire diaspora, whatever language people might speak. But let's be real clear. There are laws and there's specific funding for ESE students and ELL students, right? But my language is not respected, right? My language, which the linguists will call African American English, is not respected as a language. Therefore, you do not respect my culture. This is part of the problem that we have. It manifests in our ELA scores, but even before that, it manifests with students disengaging, because, and I remember very clearly now, my father's a lawyer, my mother was a teacher, right? Yeah, the proper English, whatever the hell that is, was spoken in our home, right? And it was a survival tool, right? Because we all do understand, like Ruby Payne said, that, vocabulary is the hidden weapon of the middle class. So we understand that black people especially will need to master this second language called Standard English if they want to be successful, right? But we don't approach it that way. And so I was told to speak proper, right? I was speaking the language of my friends, not the language of my home, actually, but the language of my friends. And I was told to speak proper. It was nothing improper. It was nothing improper about my language. There was a judgment added to that statement that said my language was improper. So I was not valid. I was not valued. And so I disengaged, right? And that's what we do to black children every day, right? I'm afraid we still do it to English language learners. But we have programs and training and money that says don't do that, right? We don't have the same for our multi-generational African in America students, right? And I'm just telling you that we must address language as part of trying to address culture. So, thank you.
Mrs. Andrews.
And I think it's not just for the teachers and the principals and everybody at a school center. It's going to be the whole body of educators within the school district of Palm Beach County and the community. Many times with a community as large and a county as large as Palm Beach County, we have not walked into areas where these children that we're talking about, the ones who are being left behind, we don't know where they live, where they come from. We haven't spent the time to get to know their parents. Many of their parents aren't empowered. Many times it's a language difficulty. Many times, just like you're saying, Dr. Robbins, there are a lot of reasons, and it's easy for us to sit here around this table and say what we're going to do. I think as a board and as an administration, we've got to get to know our communities better. I know we've said we've had family engagement programs and this and that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about really having some serious conversations with parents and communities. They will tell you the truth about what's happening and what's not happening as it relates to their children, their community. And we've got to do something about it, or we're going to still be here in the same place. Yes, you heard the word resources all through here. It is about the resources. When I'm working with schools in the Glades region where they're begging to keep a unit because of their size, when we know that they need as much help as anybody, when you start looking at pockets of poverty within Palm Beach County. So we've got to kind of get out there and see what it is that we're talking about so that we can do something. And I want parents to be actively engaged, because they do have the power to do what has to be done for their children. But we have to teach them and help them to understand that they have that power. And I think within our next strategic plan, there should be some kind of component on how we're going to help parents know about some of these things that we're talking about today. It's easy for me to talk about it. I have a Glades Career Readiness Roundtable. We meet once a month with a lot of parents and people. And they've been empowered to do a lot of things, but we can dig even deeper than that in the communities and educate people. And once you do that, they're going to take what has to be taken for their children to get their children where they need them to be. And so we've got to figure out a way how we're going to be able to empower the parents and the community. When Brother Carl comes here every week, every month, or whenever he's here, just off and on, talking about the African-American black boys, he's begging to have some power to do something. So we've got to figure, it's more than him. A lot of people want to do it to help their children. So we've got to build that. And I think that's something that needs to be in the strategic plan. Not another family engagement piece where you have a meeting here or there and you're gone. It's got to be something that's really unique, that's going to make parents believe in us, that we really believe in their children, the ones that we're talking about right here, that's not making it.
Dr. Robinson.
May I piggyback on Ms. Andrews' comments?
It's your show, ma'am, whatever you'd like to do.
I wanted to highlight a couple of things that were referenced in the comments that were just made, and actually going back to several other comments around the issue of resources. And so I want to remind all of us that resources are more than just dollars. We tend to default to that, and we're never going to have enough of that. But resources, when we're talking about it, also includes your spaces, the people that you have in your system, time and how it's used, and also power and privilege, because you do have the ability to bring in other resources through social capital, through partnerships, relationships that you have, and that's a really critical piece that would be to be parking lotted as a part of your strategic plan, because we talked in our December session about the curb cut effect. And that is directly related to allocation of resources through an equity lens, and putting the resources in the spaces where your data is showing you have the highest needs, because that does ripple out and it affects everyone in a positive way. And so I want to highlight that as a parking lotted piece, that's going to be a critical part of your ongoing conversations as you're doing the strategic plan, is how are you going to allocate resources to address the things that you are raising, and at the same time you need to be very aware that that's when you're going to start getting a lot of pushback, because as soon as you start talking about resources, which many times people default to the money part of it, and they feel that they're losing something, as opposed to what everyone will be gaining when we're bringing everyone up to a similar starting point, that this is a pushback point for you to be prepared for. But those decisions about your resource allocation are really critical to your overall success. And again, I would not be doing my job as a consultant or facilitator without saying that you need to be very well prepared with your messaging and the why of what you're doing. And there are some really good resources out there to be able to approach this in a structured way as you're looking at resource allocation through an equity perspective.
Thank you. Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. So in response to Ms. Andrews' comment, so what I think I'm hearing and I agree with is the need to do partnerships, right, with community-based organizations, because it's really, unfortunately, I don't think we do a really good job, even when we attempt to partner with or empower or whatever with parents and community, right? And so, because we're operating out of different cultures. I mean, that's just it. And so I think if we can partner with more community-based organizations. So, for example, the Coalition for Black Student Achievement is partnering with Bridges and iReady, and we're doing we're going to do a training for parents on the standards-based report card, and then all the bells and whistles in iReady that parents can use, right? And so that's just the example that I think of because the meeting was yesterday, but that kind of thing. Now, what I triggered on though was this thing where, like the knowing the community piece. So what has happened at times is that, like school-based leadership would take their staff like on a bus tour in the neighborhood to see where the children live and all that. And I actually think that that is pathologic, unless it's done properly, meaning with the right background information, because without it, they just go and say, oh, the poor little children, we really can't expect much of them because look where they live and all that kind of foolishness, right? I think, and Dr. Fenoy mentioned in his opening comments the educational debt, and I've asked people to read that article because what I need people to understand is there's nothing wrong with the children, right? I mean, many have not been multi-generationally advantaged, right? And so that's the educational debt. And so at the same time, if we were going to do this imaginary bus tour, before they went on the bus tour, like I would want them to know, for example, if they were going to go in the Tamara Rosemary neighborhood, I would want them to study the history of that neighborhood and know that it was a thriving black middle-class neighborhood and what happened to it and what were the decisions that were made by city and state and county government that basically caused it to deteriorate, because there were things that actively happened. Now, whether or not somebody was conscious that they were making moves to destroy this community, I can't say, right? But intentionality really has nothing to do with the damage you cause, right? So I just want to make that point. I really think it's actually important that our educators and our teachers and our educators and our students study the neighborhood that they are serving in. Because many of these neighborhoods, like, I wish I remembered his name. There's a black man in Belglade that saved the city, right? And built a bridge, right? I don't remember all of this, right? And the same thing in West Palm Beach, right? But we don't share that story, and then we definitely don't talk about what happened. What did the decision makers in power do to devastate that community? And guess what else? And what do they continue to do? And then what role do we play in furthering those decisions or not disrupting the damage being done? So I think really it's important that, in addition, that knowing your students' thing is also to know the story of their community, because otherwise we operate in a deficit model. They'll just look at them and say, the poor little children, no wonder they're not thriving. It's not me. It's not that I'm not teaching to their learning style. It's because they come from that impoverished neighborhood or whatever foolishness that people give themselves to lower expectations.
Ms. Ayala or Mr. Superintendent, would you like to join in on this at all? Any comments? Ms. Ayala? Mrs. Andrews?
Thank you, Dr. Robinson, and thank you to everybody. I just know my district is a large district, and I'm on the road a lot. Because as a board member, I don't want it to be that I don't know what my district looks like. And we have suburban, and I'm on the road in the suburban areas, the agricultural area of Loxahatchee and the acreage, as well as all the way out to Canal Point and to South Bay. And I think people want to see us. They want to see us out there to get to know them, and that's what I'm talking about. And I think what we have to do with this next strategic plan, because I think when we come to a meeting, or just like Dr. Robinson said, they went on the bus and they saw it and then it was over with, and they said, I did go out there one day. It's got to be more than a one day. You've got to begin to establish relationship with these parents and the community. That's what it's really all about. And once you begin to establish the relationships, and this is for teachers as well as everybody else, because when you kind of look at some of the communities, You see the custodians, they probably live in the community. Your school food service people, they probably live in the community. And they look like the community when you start talking about the school district of Palm Beach County. But then when you get to the next level, to teachers or administrators, they may not live in that community. And so they just go, and I think they give their worth during that day, but they really don't truly do enough to get to know the community. And so I think we need to, with this next strategic plan, when we start talking about community engagement and family involvement and parental power, to show them how they can have, their power to take care of what has to happen with their children, that they're paying taxes for, everybody pays taxes, but these kids that we're talking about in this data, their parents pay just as much tax as anybody else, so they should be able to have just as much of a voice. We need to be creative here in Palm Beach County as a school board to give the authority to the superintendent to be able to come up with flexible scheduling for certain kinds of people that work for the school board. So you can be on the ground when people are home at night. Most people are working during the daytime. So if you kind of go out to West Tech or you go out to the Glades for a meeting, you never really get a chance to interface with the parents and the community to know what the community is all about. So you've got to get there at night. Or if you're going on Tamarind, Dr. Robinson, I lived on Tamarind in West Palm Beach. I grew up right there. I remembered when black people owned everything downtown where City Place is. That's a whole area that used to be predominantly black that was taken over. You may go down there and say, oh my God, I'm having such a great time. Wow, it's so nice here. Black people owned the drugstores, all of the pieces down there. And when you start looking at what has happened over the years, well, it's kind of like that in pockets. Just yesterday, I was on a Zoom call with the Miss Johnson, who is a commissioner in Delray, and she was telling the children at Glade Central how the history of Palm Beach County was, when she started, and how she moved up and did things and went to Howard University. Now she's back in the community of Delray making a difference. Well, we've got to teach our history, but we need to know our history. And no better way, when I saw Mr. Tierney on the line today with the roundtable, learning about all those people that's on that. They're on there every month, and they're empowered. The Tri-Cities Education Group, they're empowered. They work with the region superintendent, and we're out there at night. I'm out there at night. You got to kind of have a flexible schedule so people can come back when the people are there and you can hear them, because I think the students are going to tell you what the real deal is, and the parents are going to tell you what the real deal is when you go to them. You can't ask them to come up in here, okay? Coming up in here and say, tell me what you want, and blah, 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 blah. For a long time, we didn't even have a way for people to come out to the Glades. They had to come all the way over here for a board meeting. We did get a simultaneous piece where they could actually have the board meeting simulcast out there. And now with all of the things with technology and COVID, we can kind of put them on now. But we kept people out. We've kept them out of participating. And that's why you get what you get here, because people are saying, it is what it is. You go to a board meeting, they make a decision, and that's it. So when we talk about time, that resource that Mary was talking about, it's going to take time for us to go to these communities. I would love to see us have a caravan where we went to see the Mayan area of Lake Worth and where all the children live. I mean, we need to go and see things so that when we're making decisions about how we spend our money and how we spend our time, I don't mind spending my time going to see stuff that maybe I haven't seen, which truly has impacted children in a negative way. And I think sometimes when we make decisions in here, we don't even know what it is because we've never been out there, to know how it is, and where our kids are living and where they come from to go to the schools every day. Now, the principals, though, and the teachers that are in those levels, and many times we can't even get the teachers from over on the east to come to the west because it's too far. Everybody has a reason. We have to drive out. So we've got to do better, and I think we can do flexible scheduling. I said last week I'd like the idea of having an exchange program. When you have a Wellington and the Royal Palm Beach and the Acreage so close together, there should be a way for some of the top talent that we have. We should be able to intermix that so that we can help train each other so that we can do a better job for the children.
Mrs. Whitfield?
May I?
Yes.
May I interject something?
Yes, ma'am.
I want to highlight what both Dr. Robinson and Ms. Andrews have said related to knowing the history. This is a really critical piece of this work that does not get the attention that it should. It is not part of what, at this point, I will be doing with you, but I really would encourage you to find a resource that can provide this for you. I've actually done a deep dive into the history of 8 different states from a racial equity lens, and it changes the conversation also, because what it makes clear as we're talking about system issues is that the policies, practices, laws that we have in place have all been done intentionally, and we have a very long history of marginalizing specific groups of people. And what we are now working with today is a direct result of that. So that this is part of the reason why we do root cause analysis, is that when our first response to a question is pretty surfacey, you know, and when you have just one level of response, the conversation you have around that and the resource response to it will be only responding to this latest manifestation of institutional and structural racism. When you're going down and doing the root cause analysis and going deeper, that becomes a very different conversation, because now you're talking about the system issues, and the resource allocation that's tied to a system issue is different. So it's this is that digging down piece. I have not done this particular type of deep dive into Florida's history, but it is shifting the conversation where communities are being honest about their own history. And we have to acknowledge that that's a problem in and of itself. We have very much whitewashed what has happened in this country, both related to the enslavement of people as well as the genocide that has been committed against our native populations. So that becomes, so a lot of organizations are starting to look at that historical piece, because our history isn't actually in the past. The things that were intentionally put in place and unfortunately, when we're talking about education, there is responsibility that you are standing on the shoulders of former board members and former superintendents who were actively involved in keeping schools segregated and not moving forward after Brown versus Board of Education in 1954. For most states, it was at least 20 more years and successive court cases that finally forced that to happen. And there were intentional policies and practices and plans that were suggested or recommended by the superintendents and district leadership teams to board members who adopted them that reinforced that. And that's just a hard fact everywhere in the country that this has happened. So because they have, the good piece is that because these can be traced back to intentional actions, they can also now be undone. They can be dismantled. They can be redesigned, reimagined, and recreated. And that's going to be an ongoing piece of your work that will end up being embodied in whatever you end up doing with your finalizing your mission and vision, and also looking at the equity policy that you have in place. So I just wanted to highlight that I would recommend this as a part of the board's work if you are able to identify some resources that can help you look at what some of these intentional historical practices were, because at this point in our history, many of those things we have adopted now as this is the way we do business. This is the way it's always been. This is the norm. And so we have to be doing some unpacking to recognize that this is where they came from and this is how they're continuing to marginalize and create barriers today.
Thank you. Mrs. Whitfield?
Thank you. One of the things that well, first of all, let me start with this. On April 15th, I am coordinating with the gracious help of the superintendent a question and answer session with the Guatemalan Mayan families and that you all will be invited, so it's a little bit of ways away. But one thing that's really, I think, important about this is those families have a very difficult time communicating with us. So we'll bring in translators, and it will be socially distanced in person at Highland Elementary. But I think we should do that for all of our groups of people in the community that have a difficult time feeling heard or feeling listened to in this community, and we have a hard time hearing them. So I think this will be a great opportunity, and Guatemala Maya Center is going to be helping. So please feel free to come. The other thing I wanted to say is that, I had said in my comments with Ms. Fertakis that one of the reasons why the status quo and the system stays in place is because it's easier. But I also think it's exhausting for us to constantly have to keep everyone separate. Some people get more privilege than others, and it just feels like, everyone's fighting for that privilege. And wouldn't it be nice if we could all everyone gets the same things that they need when they ask for it. So I know Ms. Fertakis, when I was talking to her, I just kept saying, I just don't know how we're going to fix this. And I wanted to give her an opportunity to kind of mention some of her ideas because I thought they were pretty good. I really need to feel like there's some hope in this work.
Mrs. Andrews. Go ahead, Mrs. Andrews.
Yeah, I want to say that I highlight Wellington, the village of Wellington. I've been the board member out there for 11 years. They're very progressive. We talked about the lowest 25% of students. And as an educational advisory board in the village of Wellington some years ago, they came together to say, we're going to make a difference. But we all talked about the need. You kind of go to Wellington and say, well, there's nobody there that really needs help. But when you look at your data, it shows that there are children, your ELL children, your black children that's in Wellington, your ESC children, they're there. And a lot of children that need help. And they came together to put that money in place. And now we're at about $30,000+ a school just to work with those children who truly need help. And so when you see that area getting an A rated all the time, they put their money where their mouth was, and they recognize the need to do and make a difference. And so I think we've got to have those conversations with all of our neighborhoods and working together to do what has to be done. One of the things I think these educational advisory groups that I've been into for a while, they want to hear the real issues that are happening within their community. Because if your child is doing well, you may not be looking at this data. It's the parents where the children aren't doing well that's really looking at the data and knowing that their children may not get promoted or having to go to summer school or getting tutorial. We have to educate all of the people. And I think once we educate all of the people about those that are being left behind, they will step up to the plate. But it's our responsibility to help educate the parents of those who are being left behind and those who are doing well. That power source that you said in this paperwork that makes the difference and getting what they need for their children. If we have more conversations with them about what it is all about, you're an A-rated district, you're high performing and all of this, that's great stuff, but you're leaving a lot of children behind. And parents need to know that, and many times the community wants to do something about it. So we have to get out there and educate them. And that's some of the things that I think we need to make sure that we have that on our strategic plan on how we educate the big group of people out there, the ones that we're talking about on here that has the power, has all of the things they need for their school. We want them to help us to help the other schools, because once the other schools are doing well, all of us will do well.
Ms. Fertakis.
Thank you. So I want to make sure that everyone has been able to have a chance to put out here, some of your initial thoughts, reactions, suggestions, ideas, because I do want to move you into talking about some of the words that repeatedly showed up. It's the next slide that I have in the PowerPoint. I don't want to move into that if there is if there's a couple of others who would like to make any comments to be getting some of these things out on the table. And then I'm going to take you into this conversation around some of the concepts and words that I also noted that were repeatedly showing up to start talking about some of these system issues. Again, since I cannot see, I want to defer to Mr. Barbieri if there's anybody else who would like to say something before we move into this next piece.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent.
Yeah, I think the one thing I would add, when I go to any type of session like this, I always spend the majority of my time listening, especially in my current role, because your positional power makes it different, and people try to tailor their conversations based on what someone in my position would say. But one of the things that I've heard in this conversation amongst the board members is going to be a major conflict for us. And the conflict is between centralized approach to the work and decentralized approach to the work. When I came to Palm Beach County, the number one thing people harassed me around was autonomy. We throw that word around a lot here. And the reason why I say it like that, because if our goal over time is to move to less autonomy, then I have to always state to the board, remember, when the autonomy changes or the change happens, because of our culture, who do people call? They call the board. And then the staff reacts to whatever conversations are had after that. So it's just something I wanted to put on the table, because I don't disagree with you, but the question becomes, what is our ability to move from an autonomous organization, which has been, it's not just autonomous, it is a bedrock of our culture. That's the one thing people remind you of here in Palm Beach County constantly. And so as I hear your conversations, I just wanted to put that on the table, that if that's the direction that we choose to go, that's a second order change. That's a big one. I just wanted to acknowledge that, and great conversation.
Thank you, Mr. Superintendent. Ms. Fertakis, I think everybody, Dr. Robinson and Mrs. Andrews.
And knowing our history, back in the day, all of the black teachers in Palm Beach County had to start out in the Glades before they could make it over to the east to actually teach. And when you talk about it to a lot of people in the community, this is one of the things they said, well, we all had to come through the Glades. So when we're looking at the teacher piece again, it's going to be about housing. It's going to be about recruiting people who will want to come and really care about children and make a difference. Or we're growing our own. Whatever we're going to have to do, we're going to have to make sure the housing piece and really getting to know the community. I still go back there and knowing there's nothing to be frightened about. It's about the children. These are the people that we're out there to help to get to the next level. And I was really appreciative when the old Gove by this board was given to the city of Belle Glade so that they could build affordable housing, because people do want to be safe and they do want to be near their children. So when you go into the pockets of poverty within Palm Beach County and you're asking teachers to go there, we've got to find a way to help them know that these are the students that really truly need help, the communities need help, and we have to help them to understand that. And we want to get people who truly want to be a part of that work.
Dr. Robinson.
Thank you. Okay, just a couple comments. So I appreciate the donations that the city of Wellington makes to help the lowest 25. But I mean, let's just be honest. They want the school grades to go up, so that it's real estate, right? Which is fine because it's in alignment with our goals to educate children. Sometimes these entities come forward with plans that are not in such alignment. But I don't know. I think I must have missed something, Dr. Fenoy. I didn't hear anything that my brain processed as autonomous or not. But I will say that there again, we need to look at the history. And I don't know if Ms. McQuinn or Ms. Andrews was around. But I heard tell of when Tom Mills was superintendent that there was this unified curriculum, I think is what the words were. And it was, as I understand, everybody do this, right? And I also understand that what is now teaching and learning was split into one arm developed and the other implemented, right? And why it changed, I don't know. I mean, I clearly remember the pushback with he who shall not be named. Okay, I'm sorry. A former CAO who had a plan that was even like more detailed than the unified curriculum, but and I think that might be some of the pushback that you hear, and so my focus is on children and not schools. I think if we bless children according to their needs, the school grade, the district grade, all that other stuff will come, right? But I don't really, and I hear and I understand this concept of somebody complains and they call the board member and the board member complains and things change. I don't know. That really hadn't been my experience. I guess I haven't been screaming and pounding on the table properly. But I do agree that we need to, as part of our strategic plan, as part of that process, each of us come to our own clarity about what we are saying we're going to do so that we can stand up for it, right? And then when somebody complains, we each have the clarity to say, this is the why, right? And this is what we agreed to. But then the asterisk I will say is that all good plans have flaws. So if at some point there's something brought to our attention because of a child's experience that indicates that plan could be improved, that we should bring it to you and then bring it to the board as a collective to tweak the plan, right? Because the thing I had problems with the concept of the strategic plan being like in concrete and almost like we don't care, that's what we're doing. So I just hope that we have a little bit more student-focused flexibility, not adult-focused, right? Because in my mind, if somebody comes and says, that's bad, we shouldn't do that, if they can't explain to me why that thing needs to be tweaked for the student, then my hearing aid is not attuned to that frequency so well. So thank you.
Mrs. Andrews? Okay. Mr. Fertakis, I think that's the end of comments at this point from the board members.
Okay, thank you. Hopefully this has been a helpful conversation and space for you to be able to air some things. And so there's been some issues that have come up again that I'm highlighting a few for the parking lot decision around the strategic plan. I would like to piggyback and reiterate on what Dr. Robinson just said about the plan being in concrete. This is the reason why part of your implementation process has to include regular updates on the plan to the board, as well as a yearly report out to the community. The reason for that is why we would do anything that we're working on. It's to check in, ensure that we're that the circumstances and the dynamics that we're working in are in alignment with what your current situations are, and you have the flexibility in the plan to start, to look at what some of your action plans are underneath the pillars, or whatever terminology you're going to be using, the things that will be guiding it, and making the adjustments that need to be made. Otherwise, this is not helpful. It's intended to be a guide for the board, for the shared vision that you're wanting to have, for the specific foci that you want to have to be dealing with system issues, to ensure that equity is embedded. And therefore, you need to be able to be a bit nimble with it and responsive, because the board's resource allocation decisions are going to be tied to what is coming up in that plan. And it's perfectly acceptable to say, you know what, we're going faster in this area, we want to move this up a little bit, or we're changing the timeline here for that, or we've had this unexpected thing happen that we couldn't plan for because it was on nobody's radar. And so we need to make this adjustment in the plan in this area. The issue is that it's an intentional conversation and that the communication is there and that everybody understands the why behind why that decision is made. So just looking at the time that we are at right now, I guess I want to give you the opportunity. This would be a natural break point for a 5 to 10 minute break. And so we just want to check the temperature in the room to see if that would be helpful for you at this point.
Board members, you want to take a 10-minute break? Yes. Yes, we'll take a 10-minute
Okay.
break.
All right, then we will come back at, let's see, I have to translate my time. It will be, so I'm 3 hours behind you. It'll be 2:52 is when we'll return.
Okay.